Hi everyone, this is Alex. I want to show you how to process a data list in Google Docs because Google Docs is a free online, pretty much, version of Excel, but it doesn't cost any money. It doesn't have any kind of versions that you have to worry about as far as like a student version or a regular version, things like that. It's all one version. It has just simple basic features, but they do match up with Excel. So a lot of them that you'll find in Excel, you can do in Google Docs. And I just want to show that the functions that we use to process the list are basic functions that can be used in Excel, any version, Numbers, any version, or even Google Docs. So I want to show you today how to use Google Docs to do this because this is the most simplest way to do it. It doesn't require you to buy any software or anything like that. You just go to docs.google.com and just create a free account, or if you have a Gmail account or anything like that, just sign in with your Gmail account. All right, so all you need to do is when you're in Google Docs, you just create a new spreadsheet. This is just a brand new blank spreadsheet, and I'm going to go ahead and pause the video for a second and add in some dummy data. Okay, I went ahead and added some dummy data so that we can work with this. The first thing is let's work with these two columns, and let me go ahead and delete this column and delete this column here, and let's just focus on these two, A and B, for right now, because and then we'll move on to something you might see from the county, which is like the owner's name, the last name first, the first name last, and then or in the middle, and then the middle initial at the end. But for right now, I want to focus on the A and B columns and making them proper. So that's kind of like a basic function that Excel, Numbers, and Google Docs have. And the first thing I want to explain is when you get the county data, you're going to have pretty much all the columns taken up by data itself. So one of the things you want to make sure is when you're entering in functions, don't overwrite your data with the actual function. So for instance, if I wanted to make this proper case, the wrong way to go about it would be to just go up here and type in proper and something like that, because what that's going to do is actually overwrite my data with the function. Okay, so I just want to show you that because that's something you don't want to do. Here's how you properly type in functions. You want to be working on a blank cell when you enter in functions, and then you want to reference the cell that you're working in. So the first thing that you want to do is click on the column that you want to work in, and then you want to right click and you want to insert a new column. And when you insert a new column, now you have a bunch of blank cells that you can work in. So in this case, I'm going to start at 2 because the first one's a header row, and I'm on A. My data is on column B, so it's very important that I'm working in a column that my data doesn't exist in. And here, I enter in my proper function. Proper function. And Google Docs even is nice enough to tell us what text do we want to make proper. So it tells us right now they're looking for a reference. And in here, I reference the B2 cell. And then I'm just going to close it out with another bracket. So now you can see that Dan converted over, and if I want, I can just double click or drag down that bottom right hand little box, and it copies the function down. So you can see that these functions work even in Google Docs, which is a free program. They work, but the key is to make sure that you're working in a blank cell and that you're referencing the proper cell. So let me just further explain that. So let's, for example, instead of referencing the proper cell, let's reference a the wrong cell. So if we were to reference E2, and you can see that Google highlights where we're referencing it. And you can see that E2 is blank. There's nothing in there. When we do that, it comes up as blank for us. And we can copy all that down, and you can see nothing happens here. It's not working. And the reason it is not working is because we're not referencing the correct cell. All we need to do is, instead of saying E2, which is a blank cell, bring us back to, let's for right now do D2, because there is some text in there. We go D2, and you can see here that now it is taking this owner name field and it's making it proper case. So whatever you reference here, it's going to make proper case. And it works every single time. I've never had this not work, but what you want to make sure is that you're typing this in on a blank cell, not overwriting your data. That's very important. The other important thing, the last step to kind of all of this, especially when you want to go ahead and do your mail merge, is, let's say that, and let me move this back to the E column, the B column. Oops. I can get it. Okay, the B column here. Let's say that, okay, this is your first name field. Now, one thing you'll notice is if I delete this field, I get a bunch of errors, right? And the reason I get a ref error is because I have just now deleted the column that it references. So there's nothing for this function to reference, right? So I want to make you aware of that. Now, if I put it back in there, you can see there's something to reference. There's no error. So how do we get this from a function to actual text so that we can delete this and we can also mail merge? Well, there's a simple answer to that, and that is that you highlight the entire column. You want to copy the entire column. And I guess you have to install the Google Drive app to do this part. So I'll just go ahead and add that. I don't have it on my computer yet, so I just installed that. But I'm going to go ahead again and copy this. Once you do that, you can see that no longer is our function written in here. But the actual values got written in these cells. So you can see that by looking up at this top where it says FX, there's no longer a function in there. It's just the values that show. So now, if I go and do exactly what I just did before, which is delete this reference column, I don't get an error because there's nothing that I'm referencing anymore. I've just pasted the values. So that's kind of like the last step in when you're dealing with these functions, is to make sure that you just copy over the values of the functions and you overwrite the functions themselves, so that when you take it into Word, you're not referencing anything. Otherwise, when you take it into Word to do your mail merge, it's going to give you a bunch of errors because Word doesn't do the same math as Excel does. They don't have the same background functions that Excel does. So when it goes to try to do a merge on a field that is a reference field, it comes up with an error. So you just want to follow that last step and copy everything in your column. Again, you copy it, and then you come back and you paste special paste values only. Okay, so that's the last step of it. Now that we got that out of the way, let's work on this column here, the owner's name. This is something that you might see when you get county data. I'm going to go ahead and delete these columns A and B because we're not working with them anymore. And and instead, I'm going to work on this owner's name because this is kind of how you might probably get it from the county. Now you can see here some have a middle initial, some don't. But you can also see that the last name is first, the middle, or the first name is in the middle sometimes, or in this case it's at the end. And then there's if it does have a middle initial, it's always at the end. So you can see here that there is not a simple way to do this, but we do have to think of what we need to do. Well, first we need to get the last name off of there, and that one is a little bit easier. So again, the first step to do this is I'm going to create a new blank column. So I'm going to right-click over column A, and I'm going to insert a blank column. This gives me something to work with now, so I'm not overwriting my data with my function. So you want to be working off a blank column, just as we did before. So now that we have a blank column, I'm going to strip off the last name. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one last name. And I'm going to do equals left, because I want to start with the left-hand side of this string. They call it a string. It's just a bunch of text to a computer. And I'm going to say left, and then it gives you a little cheat sheet of what, like an example. And let's just take their example here. Let's say the first thing is, what do you want to take? What string are we working with? Well, we're working with this B2 string for right now. So I can select B2, and if this is important to reference the actual cell that you want to work in. It has to be the exact cell. If I reference C2, then it's referencing a blank cell. If I reference B2, then it's correct. So let's see here, B2. Now it's correct. It's referencing my data that I want to work with. Now it tells you to put a comma. So I'm going to go ahead and put a comma. Now it tells me what's the number of characters I want to do. Well, Smith has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters. So if I type in 5, then I get Smith, right? Well, when I copy this down, you'll notice that it works out for Jones, because Jones also has 5 characters. But when I get down to Johnson, all of a sudden my formula doesn't work, because it's only referencing the first 5 characters. So there's something that needs to change, and that is this 5. The 5 needs to be dynamic, and it needs to be based off of the space of, and you can see that the space differs. Where the space is within the string differs. So in this case, it's 5. This case is 5. This case it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In this case it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the point is that it changes. Where the space is located, it changes. It's dynamic. So what we need to do is change this with a dynamic function. And the dynamic function we use is find. So we replace the 5 with find. And then we have to open up the brackets like this to work in the function. In the beginning, it asks us, what do we want to find? Well, we want to find a space. But if we just type in space, the computer doesn't know what that means. So we have to surround it by quotes. So we do quote, space, quote. And then it tells us, put a comma there to end out that. And now it asks us the text that we want to search. So again, we're working in B2, oops, B2, and we put a comma in there. And then it tells us where do we want to start? Well, we want to start, I guess, at 0. Or maybe we'll start at 1. So, okay. So we started at character 1. We're looking through B2, and we're looking for a space. Okay, now, if we look at this, Smith is good. Now, this is still incorrect, because if you look down here, if you're looking at the function, I still have the old functions here. So what I need to do is copy this function that I just did down, and you can either do it by dragging this little box down, or just double-clicking this little box to the bottom right corner of the cell. And once I do that, you can see all of a sudden the last name comes out perfect. And that is because when it gets to Johnson, it's not just pulling the 5th character like we had before. It's actually looking for the space and finding out what character the space is located at. So that's kind of what's happening in the background, and that's why it works. All right, now that's how you get the first name field. Now, just as we did before, you can't just go ahead and merge this field yet. You have to switch this function up here with the actual value. And to do that, you go up here, you right-click, you copy it, and then you right-click and, let's see, you should see this little dashed line when you copy things. So you copy it, and then you right-click, you paste, and you do paste values only. Once you do that, you can see there's no longer a function in there. There's actually values in there. So now we can do a mail merge off of this last name field. And of course, at that point, you probably want to do your proper function as well, and make it so it's not all capitalized. But let's say, like, how do we do our first name now? Because that's a little bit more tricky. So let's go over here, and we want to be working in a blank column. So I'm going to insert a blank column here, and I'm going to call this first name. All right. So here's where it gets a little tricky. There's only a few things that the computer understands, and so we have a function called length, and now let me show you how that works. If I type in len, that's the function, and it asks me what text do you want to see what the length of it is, and I say C2 because now we're working in C2. And it tells me that C2 is 12 characters long. So this entire thing, including the period and the spaces, is 12 characters long. Now, if I type in something like find, and I go and I look for a space, then it tells me the first space is at character 6. So, which is this space right here. So basically, if I know that the entire length is 12, and the entire and then the length to the first space is 6 characters, then I can essentially minus 1 from the other. And I know that sounds a little bit confusing, but let me write it out. So I'm going to get the total length of this cell, which we know is 12 because we just did that separately, and we're going to minus the 6, which we get that out, or we're going to minus it all the way up to the first space. We get that out by finding where the space is, and here we go. And then it tells me, okay, obviously 12 minus 6 is 6. But if I copy this down, it says that the total length is 4 over here. The total, the character is 8. The character is 6. Now, why do we want to do this? The reason we want to do this math here is because we want to now work with the going backwards to forwards, or from right to left. So I'll show you in this function right here because we don't have a middle initial in this one. So in this one, we want to change to say right, and then where it asks us what is the string we're working on. We select C3 because that's what we're working on right now. Put a comma in there, and it says where do you want to start, or where do you want to end, basically. And we keep this math in that we just did, and we end out the function. So now you can see that it took the first name, which is Jane, just perfectly. But what happens if we copy this function down? You can see now that it has the middle initial, it doesn't quite work out if there's a middle initial there. So there's a couple ways of doing it. We could do something like this, which is insert, and this is the way that I would go, even though it's a little bit more messy. It's just easier to keep track of. I would create another column. I'm going to insert another blank column, and now I'm just going to basically do the same function that I did here, but I'm going to run it off of this. I'm going to run it off of this column instead of this column. I'm going to run it off the C column instead of the D column. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to copy over everything that I just did, so I don't have to rewrite it. And then I come over to this blank column and I'm going to paste it in there. Now this itself is not going to work. You can see that this returns the same answer, and that is because we are still referencing the D column. But what happens when I reference the C column? So go over here, I'm going to reference the C column instead. Now you can see that I stripped off the middle initial. So I can call this one, and I'm just going to move it down, and you can see here also, it came up with an error because this one does not have a middle initial. That is easily solved by this function here called if error. You type in if error, you're telling the computer what do you do when you come up with an error. And in this case, we're going to tell it to do nothing. So I'm just going to put a bunch of quotes here, and I'm going to close it out. And if I copy this down, you can see when it hits the error, it's going to do nothing. It's going to show nothing because I just put a bunch of quotes here. I didn't put any value. If I put a value in between the quotes, like no first name, you can see if I copy this up, oops, sorry, let me go here. If I copy this up, when it hits the error, it's going to say no first name. Okay? But for now, I don't want it to say anything when it hits the error, so I just delete that, copy it down, and now I have my middle initials. Right? So now let's go ahead and create a new blank column, and now this one's going to be the first name column. And so here's where we started. Here's where we got kind of the first name. We'll go ahead and delete that because that's not perfect. And instead, if you remember what we did here, we went from the left to the space. If you look at the values now, we can do that as well. So we can go up here and type in the same function that we had typed to get the last name in the beginning, which is, we want to go to the left. We're going to start from the left, let's say. And we're going to reference this string, this D string, and then put in a comma there to go to the next parameter, and it's going to ask us where do we want to end. And again, we want to find the space. That's going to determine where we're going to end. So I'm going to type in find, and then I'm looking for a space, and I'm searching through this column D for that space, and I'm starting at character 1. All right. So now you can see here I've got Dan. And I'm going to go down here. And you can see I came up with an error here because, again, there's no space. It's the same problem that we had when we wrote this function here. To fix that, all we need to do is type in if error and then tell it to do nothing when it hits an error. And if I copy this down now, all of a sudden I get first names, and I get first names only. Now, here's the thing. I made a mistake here, and maybe you guys have caught that. And that is, in this case, we actually don't want it to do nothing if it comes up with an error, because in this case, we actually want to just copy over what's in column D. Because otherwise, we get down here, and we've lost our first name. So, instead of saying do nothing if there's an error, we want to say grab what's in this column here. And the way you do that is you just reference it. So D2, in this case, we're going to reference. Now, when we copy this down, you can see if it hits an error, which it did right there, instead of doing nothing and returning a blank value, we return what is in column D. Okay? So this, now, if you notice, if you're looking up at the top here, as I scroll through these, you're going to see all of the formulas that I just entered in. Again, we cannot do a mail merge off of this. If I go ahead and delete these columns, you'll see that it'll ruin our functions that we just did. They come up with errors. So again, to fix that problem, I'm going to copy the columns. And what I'm going to do right now, instead of right-clicking and copying, I'm just going to hit Control C on my keyboard. On a Mac, it's Command C. And you're going to see this line around it. That's how you know you just copied this. Now, I'm going to paste special values only over the top of that. And now you can see that I have no more functions. Actually, I do have a function here, so I'm gonna copy this, Control C. Oops, sorry, did that wrong. Control C, and then I'm going to right-click, paste values only. Now I have, in none of my columns do I have actually any functions. They're all data. But they've all been split out so that I can do my mail merge. And what I can do now is, since I don't need these two columns anymore, I can just go ahead and delete them. And it won't cause any errors because, again, I'm working with data now. I'm not working with functions. So now I have a last name, first name, and middle initial column. And I can go and do my mail merge after that. Now, again, if I wanted to make these proper case, all I have to do is create a new column, insert a new column, and type in my proper function. Proper, and then Smith. So now I have a last name func of, and I'm going to go ahead and create another one. Insert. This one's going to be first name, and here we go. Oops, proper, and this is the first name, and I'm going to copy that down. Now again, I'm going to copy the functions. I'm going to go over here and right-click over the top of them, and I'm going to paste special values only. Now that I've done that, I can go ahead and delete these columns. So now you see I have a perfectly formatted first name, last name, and middle initial. I'm perfectly ready to go do my mail merge now. All using Google Docs, which is a free program that pretty much anybody can use. It works on both Mac and PCs because it's an online program, so there's no computer requirements. You can do this from an iPad. You can do this from anywhere. You just need to remember that a few simple rules, and especially starting out, and that is when you type in functions, type them into a blank column. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is when you're done with your functions, go ahead and copy just the data part out by using that paste special function. And that way you're referencing actual values versus referencing functions. Okay? Hope this helped clarify a bunch of things for people. And let me know if you have any questions on it. Thanks.